So I know that January can be a time of the year where we're all full of motivation and we've all set some big goals for changes in the coming 12 months. But I also know from personal experience that as the weeks slip by, it's pretty easy for those motivations to turn into like a little bit of a rut. And that happens in photography just as easy as any other hobby or passion. So today, that's why I want to go through some admittedly kind of obvious ways that I like to find inspiration or ideas when I'm stuck in a little bit of a rut. Okay, so let's start with the most obvious and probably the most cliche of the bunch, and that is to try and find a change of scenery, to go and see something new. If you have the time and the means, this could mean like an early year trip to somewhere that's completely different. This is pretty obviously a great way to find inspiration for photos or things that you want to shoot. But it doesn't necessarily have to be this either, because I know both of those things, both time and means, can be difficult for people to find in January, at least for most people, myself included. So it can also just mean looking for something different in your local area. Are there any neighborhoods that you haven't photographed yet? Maybe any, I don't know, local experiences or things that you haven't tried out yet? Something that could be interesting and spark some new ideas. These are usually the types of questions that I ask myself. Like the idea being to put yourself somewhere new, whether that's local or abroad, in a place that's unfamiliar or feels like a kind of a kick to the senses that you might need. Travel, as I mentioned, is the most extreme way to do this, but it can also be done somewhere local too. The main idea being to put yourself somewhere new where you're asking yourself some different questions that you might not necessarily ask if you're in familiar surroundings. And when I have my camera on me, these questions usually find a way to manifest themselves into photographs. My second tip is going back to something that I always try to keep in mind when I'm photographing, and that is to look for the story, or look for the stories around you. So I know this is something that I've mentioned a lot in my videos in the past, but I'm going to go back to it again. This could be something as simple as looking for the story in like a single individual photograph. But more so, what I really mean by this is looking for the stories around you in your everyday life that you want to tell, or even stories of other people that you want to tell. For example, are there some maybe local businesses that you like that you think are a cool story that you'd like to put out there into the world? Then maybe you could go and ask them if they want their photographs taken, and you can share that with other people. Is there a way to share that story with other people in a way that's unique to you? And maybe trying to capture other people's imaginations in that way as well. Another way to find the stories around you might also mean maybe merging photography with some of your other hobbies or interests. In fact, this is usually a really nice place to start. For example, do you have a sport that you play that you think other people might be interested in hearing about or learning about? These are all great places to start. There are lots of great ways to do this and lots of great everyday stories around us. And I find that by sharing these and by just looking at these, it's a great way to get a nice boost when you're not feeling up to it or when you're struggling for ideas. Again, this is a pretty obvious one, but one that I use a lot, and that is to watch more movies. I love movies, and I personally want my photographs to feel like a frame from a movie when I'm showing them. So naturally enough, when I'm stuck for ideas or motivation, sometimes watching a movie is enough to help. And I actually think that all photographers could benefit from watching the work of some of the best directors and cinematographers out there, because these people are masters of framing techniques, lighting techniques, composition techniques, you name it. They're also a really great way to find inspiration on ways to bring bring everyday moments to life. One of my favorite things about some of my favorite filmmakers is how they make seemingly mundane, everyday scenes look amazing and really bring them to life, either through color or lighting or whatever it is. Usually finding a way to bring like a specific look or an atmosphere to their frame. And that's always a very big motivator for me. So if you're struggling for motivation, just go and watch some movies. Maybe even take some notes, grab some screenshots, and try and find what you like about it. And then go out and try and recreate that. It's, at the very least, it's bound to be fun. Okay, so this one is a bit more abstract, but something that I do on I try a weekly basis is to journal. Maybe a bit more in the past, but I still try to do it quite regularly, and it's just to write down my thoughts on a piece of paper. I personally don't do it with any kind of structure or anything, just ideas that I have, thoughts that I have, things that are going through my head, just to get them out of my head and onto a piece of paper. And what I find is by doing this on a regular basis, it's a great way to, one, just keep track of your ideas so that you don't actually forget them. But also I find that by doing this, it just clears up my head a little bit, and it makes it just a little bit easier to navigate my thoughts when I'm looking for that little bit of extra inspiration or motivation. I find that it allows me to come up with ideas a little bit quicker just because I have my thoughts out on a piece of paper out in front of me. Everything is just a little bit more organized in my head. So when it comes to times when you're feeling stuck or in a rush, this can be pretty useful. Or it is for me at least. I think it's also just pretty good for your mental health. Maybe this doesn't work for everybody in terms of ideas, but for me it does. Sometimes when it comes to getting started, the best thing that we need is maybe just a little bit of a shake-up. And to do this, it can be good to think of all of the things that you usually do or that something completely new and different. That can be a great way to, like, as I said, stop overthinking about it and to just throw yourself into it. I know maybe I'm starting to venture into the realm of BS here a little bit, but hopefully you can relate to what I'm trying to say. Like sometimes if all we want to do is shoot like beautiful portrait photography and we're just obsessed with that, but we can't find models or we're stuck for some reason or another, then the best thing you can do is maybe just go and spend a day taking street photos. And that way you're bypassing the thinking and you just start doing. It doesn't mean that you have to give up on your plans or ideas. It can just be a great way to get out of your house and get the ball rolling and actually start making something. And then you can come back to it later and you might even find that you picked up some better ideas along the way. And finally, I think for all of these things, it's important to make them as habitual as possible. Okay, well, maybe not the last point quite as much, but that too. I find that by practicing these things regularly, it helps me to just build the muscles that you need to like avoid falling into these ruts and traps that we fall into. Losing motivation and struggling to come up with ideas is totally normal. It's all part of having a creative hobby. Good old creative block. But whether it's these tips that I just mentioned or your own ones that you have yourself, I think it's important to make them a habit and just do them regularly. Even when things aren't going smoothly, I find that creativity comes from a few very simple things done regularly over a long period of time. As always, if you have any of these simple things of your own, maybe drop them in the comments and let me know. Always interested in hearing them. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.